Hey, good morning. Could you please confirm that you hear me okay? Okay, perfect. Thank you. Good morning and afternoon, and welcome to everyone joining us today. My name is Jorge Cárcamo, and I am a member of the Paris Committee of Capacity Building. I would like to warmly welcome you to this event titled Human Rights, Security, and National Adaptation Plans Nexus, a holistic approach to women and human mobility. This event is led by the Research Center for Climate Law from the University of Graz and ACE Observatory Climate Governance Compass through the PCCB network. Before we deep dive into the nexus between climate adaptation, human rights, and security, I would like to quickly introduce you to the Paris Committee on Capacity Building. The PCCB works to address current and emerging gaps and needs in implementing capacity building in developing countries. Additionally, the PCCB seeks to enhance capacity building efforts, including coherence and coordination in capacity building efforts related to climate change. To support the PCCB's mission and mandate, the PCCB network was launched as a platform to share information on best practices, contribute to the work of the PCCB in fulfilling its mandate, and connect the stakeholders engaged in climate-related capacity building across sectors and regions. As of today, the PCCB network brings together 403 organizations from 98 countries, all actively engaged in strengthening capacities for climate action. These organizations have been sharing knowledge, building partnerships, and learning from one another through this private platform. In addition to the network, the PCCB also hosts its annual capacity building hubs at the Conference of the Parties. These hubs serve as dedicated spaces for collaboration, co-creation of knowledge, and shared learning among the global capacity building community. The call for expressions of interest to participate in the 7th Capacity Building Hub, set to take place this November in Belém, is now open. We warmly invite you to submit your proposal through the 7th Capacity Building Hub webpage by August 17th. To learn more about the PCCB network, and how to become a member, you can access the website. The PCCB network team will send more information on the chat. As many parties and other stakeholders call on enhancing the synergies between climate adaptation, human rights, and security, this session presents as an opportunity to take stock of the work carried out by different organizations and explore new pathways to strengthen these efforts, particularly in the process of updating and implementing policy planning documents, such as national adaptation plans. Through the exchange of knowledge, experiences, and case studies, we hope this session can inspire your organization to work more closely in the climate, human rights, and security nexus, and build the necessary capacities to do so effectively. I am really looking forward to hearing from our distinguished speakers, experts, and practitioners who will share their invaluable insights and experiences today. On behalf of the PCCB, I would like to thank the Research Center for Climate Law and ACE Observatory teams for collaborating on this event. Thank you, as well to our panelists and our audience. Now, over to Isatis to kickstart the session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jorge, and welcome everyone to this session. We are very excited to see your interest in being with us today. I'm joining on behalf of the ACE Observatory, and we work on advancing and track people-centered climate action that's grounded on justice, participation, rights, and equity. My name is Isati Centron. I am a Puerto Rican climate scientist and activist. And I guess in terms of this topic, we have seen the dynamic play out in Puerto Rico, where years of climate exacerbated disasters, austerity, and forced displacement have pushed thousands to leave, and not as a matter of choice, but of survival. This week, we saw that in the International Court of Justice affirmed that non-refoulement obligations extend to people displaced by climate change and climate impacts, and that means that states now have a legal duty not to return people to places where their lives and rights are threatened by climate breakdown. So this is more than a legal interpretation. It is a recognition that climate displacement is a human rights issue. Um, Now, current policy frameworks have to catch up. Um, so we have a year where we have seen rhetoric that, have racialized borders and have more than 60,000 people that are newly displaced on the move every day, and often because the adaptation systems have failed them. We have food system, housing protections, labor rights, and safety nets, all the things that should help people stay, right, and guarantee their right to stay, are crumbling in many places. And when people move, we see how this responsibility shifts. So now we are here in this event today to kind of explore what are the opportunities and what are some of the barriers and bright spots to deal with this. So I want to pass uh, the floor to Professor Oliver Ruppel, who will be giving us kind of a view of the landscape and understanding how climate-related human security risk um, are played in anchoring, given that University of Graz, Climate Law are co-hosting with us this session.
Thank you very much, Isatis, for this kind introduction. And hello, everyone. I'm very excited to be here with you. I am currently in Johannesburg in South Africa, not in Graz in Austria, but I am the head of the Center for Climate Law in Austria, where we do research on climate law in the widest sense, in an interdisciplinary manner, from a human rights perspective, from an economic perspective, from a humanitarian perspective. We work interdisciplinarily with many other faculties and centers around the world, on the brim to politics, on the brim to diplomacy. And I'm very excited to be here with Atiye, also from our center, who's specializing on women's rights and human security, who is, so to say, the initiator of this event here from our side. And I congratulate the PCCB for the excellent work that they're doing in capacity building, and exercises like this one are essential. Delighted to be part of this, also being part of the delegation to the COP later this year, where I would like to testify on such a wonderful experience. Our center is a center that is 5 years old this year, so we have a little celebration, and we envisage to become part of a newly established European Society for Climate Law that can push towards an international association for climate law that works in the context of climate litigation, for instance. And there, like Isatis has already mentioned, the ICJ judgment from last week is, of course, instrumental in our work for the future, giving us a clear message that climate change is an essential issue, and human rights are so dearly affected, and we have to consider this in everything, basically, that we do from now on forward. I would like to utilize the few minutes available to inform or to set the scene, rather, on understanding climate-related human security risks. This is an issue that personally I have worked on as a member of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in the assessment report number 5, where this issue has been investigated thoroughly. And I would like to share a few statements from that and from some related publications that we have made in a few minutes, just to make the audience a bit more familiar with this concept of human security and climate change. Human security has been addressed for a number of decades, of course, also in the context of climate change, because it is related to human life and dignity. And there was a United Nations Development Program report in 1994 that investigated this, and this report already emphasized on 4 essential characteristics of human security, making it a universal concern, making it an interdependent issue, and also relating it to the issue of prevention, and perhaps most importantly, making it a people-centered concept. In the same report, 7 interdependent components of human security have been identified, which are economic security, food security, health security, environmental security, personal security, community security, and political security. This list is by no means conclusive, but it encapsulates the concept of human security, which is also beyond this based on 2 very important pillars. The first one is the freedom from fear factor, which focuses on the protection of individuals from violent conflicts and from the denial of civil liberties to ensure freedom of expression and belief. I think in these days, this is something we acknowledge to become more and more important. The second pillar is the freedom from want factor, which emphasizes satisfying the individual's basic need for food, shelter, and clothing. And this, in this context, of course, climate change has the potential to impose additional pressures on human security, along with many socioeconomic factors. And conflict, and this is also part of our discussion here today, is closely related, because conflict, climate change induced disasters, and human mobility are intrinsically interlinked. And this does not mean that climate change is the only push factor or pull factor. It is a combination of factors that contributes to this sensitivity, which has a human rights element to it, has humanitarian aspects to it. And there are several channels in which climate change can affect human security. Number one, the aspect of vulnerability. This is a threat to food security, health security, and exposure to extreme weather events. Number two, development. If climate change slows down or reverses development processes, then vulnerability increases and the capacity to maintain stability decreases or can decrease. Number three, coping and security. The responses of households and communities to climate-related threats, for example, through migration or competition for natural resources, can increase the risk of national or regional conflicts and international repercussions. The issue of statelessness. When national territories disappear, this has implications for the rights and security of people, while sovereignty of states is at stake, and international conflict. Climate change impacts on shared or not demarcated international resources that can have consequences for international cooperation. After all, climate change can jeopardize peace and security, not seldomly forcing communities to redefine their understanding of security and peace for future generations. These so-called climate security, this discourse also has led to diverging responses. And in a time that we live in, after more than 3 years of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, with widespread and severe harm to human and non-human life, we can already see the coexistence between the changing of the climate, the effects on human security, and what conflict can do to exacerbate this explosive combination. So the war in Ukraine has caused water and air pollution, soil degradation, biodiversity loss. Roughly 25% of Ukrainian territory is mined, which makes it impossible for people to live in these territories. This has created a double vulnerability of the Ukrainian population affected by the conflict. In addition to the daily risks caused by hostilities on the ground, they face damaged ecosystems. This is a climate humanitarian crisis that so far has not been sufficiently addressed. Ukraine is a leading supplier of food and to other countries in the world, and the threat of reduced harvests and production as a result of military operations now contribute to the impacts of climate change, which is already leading to malnutrition in different parts of the world and volatility in food prices. So this overall militarization leads to the fact that long-term projects related to climate change challenges are deemed to face increasingly an inadequate support for international efforts. This is a climate humanitarian crisis which should be of concern to all. Let me conclude. Climate change is a major driver of conflict and insecurity in different contexts, and national adaptation plans, which we will discuss here today, offer key benefits in addressing the challenges and opportunities it presents for peace and human security. Climate vulnerabilities and climate risks are for many nations closely linked and exacerbated by armed conflict, as the Russian aggression against Ukraine underlines. Conflict and violence undermine the ability to deal with the increasingly severe impacts of a changing climate, and at the same time, climate change threatens to exacerbate and create tensions and conflicts. Fortunately, well-designed and implemented climate adaptation actions can effectively counter diverse climate vulnerability and conflict and attribute to peace-building actions that strengthen the population in terms of the impacts of climate change. Therefore, aligning national adaptation plans and peace-building processes in conflict and post-conflict countries can contribute to human security, reduce climate risks, and make communities more climate resilient. In light of this, gender sensitivity and human rights-based frameworks need to be invoked in the national adaptation plans, design and implementation. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention and look forward to the deliberations of today.
Thank you so much, Professor Rupel. And let me share my screen because I'm the next presenter. But please confirm if you can see my screen. Yeah? Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Rupel, for introduction on climate security risk. And I would like to also thank you, PCCP, for giving our center and ACE Observatory for organizing this session and discuss about this timely topic. I'm Atiye Khatibi. Just let me, yeah. I'm Atiye Khatibi, a PhD researcher project assistant at Clean Law Center. And today I'll be speaking about women's and climate security risk and the importance of integrating these issues in national adaptation plans. Here is actually a quick roadmap of what we will discuss in this presentation. Firstly, I will briefly introduce climate security risk and ICJ advisory opinions, which is that is also mentioned about that climate security risk and women and integrating these important issues in NAPS. I will provide a few case study examples and guidance entry points for countries and how we can integrate climate security risk and women in the context of NAFs and some key takeaways after this session for you. Climate change is increasingly recognized as a threat multiplier, intensifying existing vulnerabilities and exacerbating social, political, and economic insecurities, thereby posing risks to peace and human security. It impacts the depletion of natural resources and limits access to those resources which are necessary for securing sustainable livelihood, which could lead to violent conflicts. Furthermore, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change IPCC Fifth Assessment Report also emphasized that climate change can indirectly increase the risk of violent conflicts by amplifying a well-documented driver of poverty, of conflicts such as poverty and economic instability. One of the recent reports by Adolphi, which is a think tank in Berlin, outlined 7 different types of climate security risks, which you can see in this slide, including conflict or competition over natural resources, climate-induced human mobility, food and water insecurity, and loss of livelihood. Before talking about gender and climate security risk, I would like to use this time to mention to ICJ advisory opinion and to reaffirm that climate change is a human rights issue. The ICJ advisory opinion, actually a recent one, which was released a few days ago on 23rd of July, the message of ICJ advisory opinion was completely clear that climate change is an existential threat and climate obligations are not aspirational anymore, but climate obligations are legal, substantive, and enforceable. So states have binding obligations to prevent significant environmental harm, to cooperate internationally, and to uphold fundamental rights. And when climate security risk violates human rights, many states are parties to many environmental treaties, many human rights treaties, and a clean, healthy, and a sustainable environment is a precondition for the enjoyment of many human rights. So it is obvious that the states are responsible for protecting environment and climate change system to safeguard human rights in facing climate change and climate security risk. But why women are very important in the context of climate security risk? Women are among the population most impacted by climate security risk. But why? Because women have fewer resources to respond or to react or to reduce the consequences of climate change and climate security risk, particularly those living in fragile environmental contexts. Also, a lack of state service in fragile condition will decrease their coping capacity to climate change and increase women's sensitivity to climate change. And because of women's limited productive and income generation capacities, limited access to land, water, or other natural resources and decision-making process, they often bear a greater share of burden in climate conflicts and face frequent displacement. As you can see in this map shows the connection between three major global challenges: insecurity, climate change vulnerability, and gender inequality. The darker the color, the higher the levels of these three combined issues. As the map highlights, many countries in Africa, Middle East, and some parts of Asia face the highest risk. These are areas where climate change hits hardest, security is fragile, and gender inequality remains high. And the map shows clearly that tackling climate change must include efforts to promote security and promote gender equality as well, especially in those vulnerable regions. As you can see in this slide, the UN Secretary General acknowledged this in his 2019 annual report on women, peace, and security, which states the global threat of climate change and environmental degradation is posed to exacerbate the already increasing number of complex emergencies which disproportionately affect women and girls. There is therefore an urgent need for better analysis and concrete immediate actions to address the linkages between climate change and conflict from a gender perspective, which we will discuss today in this presentation. Let's zoom in one of climate security risk, human mobility, because the AC Observatory, another organizer of this session, will deeply discuss about human mobility and climate migrants and the importance of integrating climate migrants in designing NAPS. But I will discuss very briefly about human mobility from a perspective of climate security risks. In conflict-affected areas, climate-induced human mobility may be linked to other security risks, such as competition over natural resources, which can lead to increased tensions and conflicts. In other words, displaced group may face further displacement or compete over natural resources which are in a scarcity. Um, if they move to and settle in climate change hotspots where existing vulnerabilities and natural resources scarcity already exist. And if insufficient information provided, especially for women, it increases the risk of them moving to more vulnerable regions, facing more conflicts and tensions. In this regard, the Special Rapporteur on the Rights to Housing in its 2009 report highlighted that climate-induced human mobility could threaten the right to housing. So in this regard, relocation policies and measures should consider women's needs as they are among the most affected groups. Now, we should talk about the importance of climate security risk inclusion into national adaptation plans. As I mentioned earlier, climate change indirectly intensifies conflicts, and climate change is likely to decrease people's coping capacity in response to climate change and thereby increasing their exposure to climate security risks. But on the other hand, NAPs are a key tool for developing countries to communicate their adaptation goals to UNFCCC. In this context, increasing conflict and security awareness in NAPs would support reducing climate change vulnerability, increase people's resilience to climate change, and its associated security impacts, fostering peace. However, only a few countries, unfortunately, made a reasonable effort in this regard to include climate security aspects in their NAPs. Republic of South Sudan's NAPS offers a great example of integrating climate security risk and women in their NAPS. These NAPS explicitly reference to conflict resolution and peace building in adaptation projects. As you can see, I brought an exact part of this NAP that you can see that in this adaptation plan, it mentioned to the resultant competition for limited natural resources, which may contribute to conflict between communities. And it is also recognized that ongoing conflicts exacerbate the vulnerability of affected communities to climate change. And this should be considered in design of adaptation projects. And on the other side, also, these NAP recognize the importance of climate change and women, including the direct loss of livelihoods. Adaptation plans should prioritize vulnerable communities such as women first. Here, in this slide and the next slide, very briefly, I will talk about some guidance entry points very rapidly because I don't have much time. Some guidance entry points for countries, how they can integrate climate change security risk and women in designing and implementing NAFs. First of all, a security risk analysis, including conflict analysis, including the situation of human mobility, the number of climate migrants, their circumstances, water and food insecurity, and other factors related to climate security risk should be part of vulnerability assessments for adaptation planning and implementing. Also, there are some guidelines or agendas or other related policies for addressing climate security risk and women in NAPs for adaptation plan. So applying those kinds of guidelines and agendas in designing and implementing NAPs would be a very great tool for countries. For example, some countries have adopted a national action plan for women, peace and security. Women, peace and security is one of the Security Council resolutions explicitly addressing women and peace, women in the context of peace and security. And some countries have adopted a national action plan for women, peace and security, including a situation analysis of the interconnection between climate change and WPS issues. So it is suitable for such countries with such policies to integrate women, peace, and security in the context of climate change for designing and implementing national adaptation plan for climate change. The harmony between these two policies would help each of them to be better implemented, and this harmony would reduce duplication. And programs can share budgets, data system, and implementation framework. And also, it facilitates cross-sector coordination between agencies and ministries to become more structured. For example, the Philippines NAP on women, peace, and security is one of another best example, which includes situation analysis and highlights the interconnection between climate change and women, peace, and security issues, and the need for gender perspective, which is a great tool again for countries, as an example, how they can integrate climate security and peace and with the focus on gender perspectives. And some more guidance entry points. Let's not forget about accountability and measuring gender equality and women's empowerment in practices by evaluating leadership roles, access to resources by asking this question, are women receiving equal access to climate finance, land, or technical tools? Shift in norms. Are there observable changes in gender norms or increased acceptance of women in public decision-making roles? And finally, policy influence. Have women's groups been consulted or involved in shaping local or national adaptation and peace building plans? And finally, these are some other guidance entry points, such as integrating experts and responsible authorities in different areas, such as conflict prevention, such as humanitarian aid, development, alongside of climate change and environment protection in designing NAPs. Also, better policy dialogue, including government entities, civil society, academic experts, and global agencies would be a great tool again for countries, as well as advocacy campaigns to promote the integration of climate security risk in NAPs by highlighting the voices and the experiences of women affected by climate security risk and showcasing best practices and innovations of women-led organization or youth-led organization, and as well as research analysis. Finally, as I bring this conversation to end, I just would like to highlight some key takeaways for you, and I hope that these takeaways, these actually important points will stay with you after this session. First of all, climate security risk, conflict, food, water insecurity, livelihood loss, and mobility must be addressed in NAS. These risks have a gender dimension, and women's rights and leadership are not optional. They are essential for effective and just adaptation. And guidance entry points exist and are being piloted globally. But this is our task to implement and use them locally in our regions. Thank you so much for your attention, for your presence, and I hope that I could share some reflections and insights about how we can integrate climate security risk and women's rights in the context of implementing and designing NAPs. And if you would like to connect for further exchange ideas or further collaboration, please feel free to reach out to my email address, and I'm really looking forward to Q&A session. The floor over to you, Isati. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I wrote a message in the chat, but I am going to read it here. Make sure to put your questions to our first two panelists in the chat to make sure that they are able to also answer your question, given that we will not have time for Q&A. So with that, I'm going to pass to our moderated panel, in which we will hear some of the guidance for including people on the move on NAPS, and then we will also hear some research insights from the field in the Middle East. So thank you so much. Jocelyn Perry is with us from Refugees International. She is the Senior Advocate of Climate Displacement Program. And we have Wasim Ben Romdan. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that. Okay, great. He's the Middle East Mixed Migration Project Specialist at the Mixed Migration Center. So thank you so much both for being here today. And without any further ado, I wanted to ask, in your context and the different populations that you might be exposed or talk with, how do you see climate-related mobility showing up, and how do current policies might fail to reflect this? So first, what are those climate impacts that might be affecting migration? And then I will come back to ask for like some of the patterns and coping strategies. But yeah, whomever wants to start. Jocelyn.
Thank you. Sorry, I saw Wasim's microphone was on, so I thought you'd let him go first. But I think that in terms of climate-related mobility, what I want to start by saying is that the goal is really to reduce forced displacement in the context of climate change. As you were saying with your opening remarks, Isatis, that people who are moving in the context of climate change are not necessarily choosing this, that if in the absence of climate change and its impacts, these people would not be choosing to move, then this is forced displacement. And of course, within that, there's a whole range of agency that people have, options that they have, depending on their circumstances. But I think that we have to recognize and start from a policy perspective of preventing as much forced displacement as possible. And that starts, of course, with mitigation and mitigation measures, and then it moves to adaptation. And so for what we can't mitigate, we have to adapt to, and we have to provide funding and technical resources for communities to stay safely in place. And then only when we move beyond those policy options do we start talking about how to support movement that's safe and dignified and enables as much agency as possible for those communities that have to move and choose to move. And so starting from kind of supporting all of those pieces, I think that sometimes within the displacement and mobility community, we really just talk about, displacement as a form of loss and damage, but how do we enable all of those other factors that allow people to stay safely in place to the degree possible? And then when we are talking about displacement and mobility in the context of climate change and its negative impacts, making sure that we're not being reductive and talking about people displaced by and migrating under climate change as one monolithic group, but recognizing that there are, in the technical guide on integrating human mobility in national adaptation planning, there are 11 different forms of mobility that they talk about. And so making sure that when we design policies and try to integrate mobility into adaptation planning, that we're recognizing all of this spectrum and that we're supporting people kind of across it. So there's also the fact that climate change impacts human mobility, but also that mobility influences vulnerability to climate risks, or the technical guide calls this multi-directional, that migration can be a form of adaptation, but it can also be maladaptive. People might end up moving to more dangerous places. People on the move might be more exposed to the impacts of climate change. People might face repeat displacement. All of these factors have to be considered in adaptation planning as well. And that other factors beyond, just climate change, but social, political, economic, demographic, environmental factors influence people's vulnerability. So someone might move in the context of climate change, but then face any number of discriminatory or pressures from violence in the place that they've moved to, or economic hardship, or lack of health care because of lack of access to documentation. So all of these factors kind of intertwine in terms of the policy context that fail to reflect the different dimensions of human mobility. You can't just support people's climate resilience, but you also have to support every other aspect that is essential for people's quality of life. And I'll close with the particular context I work in, which is often with refugee communities, and that's that refugees are often particularly vulnerable to climate change. And I'm talking about refugees who are displaced by conflict or other factors, who have official refugee status, but then because of that status, there's restrictions on where they might be able to live, whether they can leave an encampment environment, their right to work, their right to modify their shelters, and all of those restrictions, even if they're not living in a place that's exceptionally exposed to climate change, though often they are, those restrictions make them more vulnerable to the effects of climate change and prevent them from adapting as effectively. So these groups, refugees, but also internally displaced persons, labor migrants, others who are moving in the context of climate change, are really rarely consulted in the process of developing national adaptation plans or nationally determined contributions, other action plans. So their concerns, these specific restrictions aren't included, which means that the plans ultimately rarely reflect or include actions that will support their needs. And so I would start by saying that we need to be including these groups from the start of the development of these plans so that their considerations and actions to help them adapt are included. Over to you.
Thank you. And I think that is very important, the multidirectional process, right? Because I think, the more we mitigate, the more we adapt, less losses these people on the move and overall. But sticking to the point, the people on the move will get better treatment, but also recognizing the structural injustices that are embedded, that are not necessarily only about climate change. So I wanted to hand out to Wasim. I know that you've been working a little bit with migrant workers. So in that context, what are kind of the exposure impacts that you've been seeing on the field?
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you to the audience. I see a great presence, so happy that people are interested to discuss this very important topic. So I'm maybe just presenting myself and who we are. So I'm Wasim, I'm from the Mixed Migration Center. So basically, we conduct independent research and analysis on various topics pertaining to mixed migration across the regions where we operate. For instance, migration trends, drivers, protection issues, with the aim of informing policy and practice with evidence. So basically, policy engagement and engaging with practitioners are quite crucial for our work to make sure that we don't just stop at the evidence generation stage. So I'm based in Jordan, and I specifically oversee our work and research portfolio in the Middle East. You mentioned our recent study. So a bit of background on that, which would kind of help a bit more understand the findings and my reflections. So we conducted a study in Saudi Arabia, quite rare because field work is not quite common in GCC countries. So a research that was done in early 2025, combining 200 individual surveys around that, in-depth interviews, focus group discussions, etc., with migrant workers from countries across 4 regions in Africa and in Asia. So specifically, we focused on migrant workers who were engaged in low-paid, climate-exposed sectors such as construction, agriculture, and waste collection, for instance, where we tend to see individuals who are working outside for long hours. If anyone has been to any of the Gulf countries, especially in the summer, the heat gets extreme, the temperatures get extremely high. The breathing in itself is a challenge. So to say the least, a lot of climate stress. And yeah, the aim was to not only capture quantitative trends, trying to kind of understand like a broader trend, but then also we wanted to capture the lived experiences, the human stories behind these experiences, to understand how climate-related stressors are shaping the daily lives of migrant workers, their mobility decisions, their working conditions, and future aspirations. How they're shaping these aspects, but then how all of these aspects interact together. So regarding your question, so in this research, and I'll base most of my answers on this research, but I think it's applicable to other contexts, but then other aspects. So we saw a very different phase of climate-related mobility. So most migrant workers we spoke to had not moved because of climate change, but even though we're talking about contexts where climate stressors are quite acute. But once in Saudi Arabia, they were working and living in environments that are heavily impacted by extreme heat. Mostly this was what was reported by the respondents, extreme heat and dust storms. Climate risks also were not reported as the main driver of onward mobility either, so moving from Saudi Arabia, but they were shaping the health outcomes, job precarity, and well-being in ways that would eventually become unmanageable. So yet the risks remain invisible in most policy frameworks, which rarely integrate the needs of foreign workers, especially in countries of destination. There is a clear disconnect between climate governance and labor governance, and that's where many migrants fall through the cracks. So yeah, this is not to say that climate-related mobility that comes in the form of constrained mobility or involuntary immobility does not exist. Many workers who do want to move either within the country or back to their or either to another country or back to their countries of origin, that we found that despite this desire, a lot can't due to debt, legal restrictions, or employer control, for instance, which is quite prominent in Saudi Arabia. So people are in a way kind of stuck. Yeah. So in brief, yeah.
Yeah, and I think like that's very important because one of the aspect is the mobility because of climate, and another one is recognizing people, displaced people on the move as a marginalized group. And regardless if they move for climate or not, there needs to be some policies in place to make sure that we're taking them into consideration when we are developing policies. So I want to turn to Jocelyn. You mentioned the guidance of the task force in adaptation. What are some good practices for taking into account human mobility in adaptation planning?
Yeah, thank you. I think that the first place to start is sort of where I finish, which is inclusion to the utmost degree, and sort of from every part of the process, that you're not, if you're a government official or a UNFCCC official who's working on NAP support, it's not that every step of the NAP, from identification of hazards to program preparation, is sort of completed, and then there's maybe a cursory consultation with community members at that phase, but that really from every step of starting with community concerns, identifying hazards, through project design and implementation to monitoring and evaluation, that all of these steps include community participation, and ideally, consultation with a wide spectrum of community members, because as each of us knows from our own experiences in life, one person can represent the views of an entire community. So having sort of one refugee representative or one migrant representative on a committee is not necessarily going to be representative of the concerns of an entire community. And then to some of the focus areas of this particular event, that might mean ensuring that there's gender representation, ensuring that both men and women and others, including non-binary individuals and different gender representations, are included, so that the different concerns of each of these groups is represented in the design and implementation of an adaptation plan. And then, of course, that goes to particular contexts as well. One country might need to focus on refugee inclusion because they host a large number of refugees, whereas other countries might be more focused on including people who are migrating due to labor issues, internally displaced groups, or any number of other specific issues like planned relocation that might be important to a country's individual context. And I think that's why it's really important and great that the national adaptation planning process has been designed as a country-driven process so that it can be context-specific. But I also think that we need to be mindful of the groups and individuals who might be marginalized within a national context that governments might not necessarily be supporting. And I think that's where civil society and other groups need to come in, and where UNFCCC processes need to make sure there's inclusion for these other groups, that it's not just countries that have access to, for example, the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage and the Santiago Network's technical resources for loss and damage, but that community organizations can access these as well. Because if you do have groups that are marginalized within a national context, which could be internally displaced people, could be labor migrants, could be refugees, these groups need to also be able to access these resources that the international community is putting together and making available. And these resources need to be a lot more accessible as well. And so these are maybe lessons or recommendations that aren't just applicable to human mobility related contexts, but across the social inclusion and human rights respecting context. But things like resources available in local languages, not just in English, not just in official UNFCCC languages, and also accessible language. So we're hoping this year to actually take the technical guide on integrating human mobility in NAPs and make it digestible for community groups, so that it's maybe 2 pages for how these lessons apply to refugee communities, rather than the 191 pages that includes everything but might not be applicable in each context. And I think the final piece is just using the data that we have and the tools that we have to apply to these new situations. So we have basic urban planning knowledge. We know how to make cities safe for people and welcoming for communities, but knowing, okay, we expect an increase of X% of population over the next Y number of years, we can plan for that population increase due to climate change and climatic pressures. But we need to make sure that the hard infrastructure is adapting to climate changes so that people are safer. They're not, once moving, then even more exposed to climate pressures, but that roads are safe, that homes are safe, and that the soft infrastructure is there, that people have access to healthcare and jobs and educational opportunities and are not being discriminated against in these new communities. So I think it's a combination of sort of that soft technical support and specific hard infrastructure that supports both migrants, displaced communities, and host communities. Thanks.
Yes, absolutely. And I think something that you said, like we know how to make communities and cities, work for people. I think about when we have like in like talking about disabilities, right? Like that is another group. There is this concept of the curb cut, the curb cut effect, and this means that how features are initially designed for people with disabilities, like curb cuts themselves, can work for other people, right? Like can work for strollers, can work for people that have bikes, etc. So I think like when we build inclusivity within our whole climate structure and in our whole climate planning, we're helping different groups. And of course, each one of them needs a different sort of focus and engagement strategies. But I think like by, as you say, like focusing on like social inclusion overall, we can be enhancing how people on the move, migrants, refugees are included. So passing to Wasim, based off you told us, right, like about how these migrants might be stuck for many like social, economic factors while being also exposed to extreme heat and dust storms. Within the patterns and the interviews that you saw, and the coping mechanisms that they might have, what of those could help shift the way that we design climate responses, especially ones that take seriously the realities of migration, labor exploitation, and constrained mobility?
Mhm. Absolutely, and very good question. So again, focusing on the research. So our findings show that for many of the migrant workers, at least the ones we've interviewed, mobility is not a sign of resilience. It's a reflection of structural necessity for many. Migration often begins in a context of economic precarity and climate stress in countries of origin, but the move itself rarely results in greater agency based on our findings. In Saudi Arabia, workers are embedded in low-paid, climate-exposed sectors and face significant legal constraints under the kafala system, if you're aware of it, and they often lack meaningful recourse to adapt or move. Coping strategies like adjusting routines, for instance, to avoid peak heat or procuring protective gear, these are the ones that have been reported, and they're often individualized, often unsupported, and deeply constrained by debt, employer power, and legal restrictions. So you really have these like compounded interacting vulnerabilities. Climate responses that need to take this constraint agency very seriously. That means shifting from worker-focused adaptation to not only focusing on that, but also focusing on structural interventions, improving legal protections, regulating exploitative recruitment, ensuring labor reforms actually reach the most marginalized, including those in informal work. We have a lot of invisible communities, a lot of communities that, as I said, are already at very high risk. And those are particularly left behind and forgotten and not included in whatever planning and policy discussions. So yeah, I think these are all important aspects.
Yes. And finally, for both of you, I wanted to, we have talked about like this cycle of mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage, and we know that people on the move lose a lot, right? Like when they're moving from their home to like another place, like a foreign space. How do we address the losses? I mean, like first of all, like what are some of the losses that they might experience, and how do we address them, that these experience, especially when they're not captured in traditional economic terms. We have like the non-economic losses, and when they're not capturing climate plans.
Go ahead,
Go
Jessica.
ahead. Thank you so much for that. I think that I sound like a broken record at this point, but recognizing there's no one-size-fits-all approach, and designing our institutions with that in mind is the starting point, that people need to be able to ask for and demand what they need in their specific context, because displacement and migration will affect people differently from place to place, but also depending on their starting point, their education level, their current job, the opportunities they might have access to, the family members they might have, and the place they're moving to. All of those things are going to affect what they need. And so having participatory mechanisms in things like the Board for the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage, the Board of the Santiago Network, other institutions within a national government, really will make sure that people can ask for those specific pieces, and that we're not deciding it without that community input. And that means also reducing the barriers to participation, and taking account, and this is where specific to people on the move, the restrictions that they might have. As you say, they might have lost documentation, they might have lost their national identification, which they need to access healthcare. And so creating the opportunity for people to access these essential services, by reducing barriers to that, is really critical. And this might come outside the climate context as well. So for refugees, often the refugee status determination process can take years, can take 6 years, 7 years on average in a lot of countries. And that means that people don't have official identification that shows that they're a refugee in that country, which means they might not be able to access services from various non-governmental organizations, from government, from UN. And so making that process where people can access identification simpler can be supportive. The issue of registration for community-based organizations and refugee-led organizations is often really difficult. And then, if the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage, for example, puts in place a restriction that an organization must be registered, that means in some countries, there are 5 or fewer officially refugee-led organizations that have been granted registration from the government. And so that's another way that they're restricted from accessing these technical opportunities and financial opportunities to support whatever their specific needs are. And then I think for non-economic losses, or things that you might not be able to capture in traditional economic terms, you need a sort of full spectrum of community organized and supported responses. So mental health care, healthcare, support for cultural institutions and traditional knowledge, and making sure that our loss and damage institutions aren't awarding funds with a bias towards return on investment, scalability, other sort of traditional economically driven motives, recognizing that this is to support communities and not to earn income or earn a return on investments. So how do we support traditional knowledge holders of a community to ensure they can continue to pass on their work and their knowledge to community members, even if they're living in displacement? How are we funding psychosocial support and therapy for people who have experienced extreme trauma, who have, maybe lost family members, who have lost their communities, their homes, their homelands? All of these require money to support the people that are doing that work, even if they're not economic losses. And then making sure that the mechanisms beyond the climate work are also supporting these people, that we're respecting the rights of migrant workers, that their visas are not tied to their employers, so that they're not facing repeat discrimination or exploitation or additional loss and damage while in the process of moving, but that they're able to sort of move with safety and dignity, and that the other aspects of society are supporting them as well.
Thank you. Anything you would like to add with him?
Yeah. Yeah, and maybe not to kind of repeat all the important points that Jocelyn mentioned. So again, I'm coming in with the labor mobility linked to climate impact perspective. So, I mean, in terms of economic losses within our study, these were the most visible, or the ones that surfaced more. And we're talking withheld wages, high recruitment fees, loss of income due to illness or unsafe working conditions, remittances, and under financial and emotional pressure. These are significant, often push workers further debt, and which leads to like a reduced ability, further reduced ability to adapt to climate stressors. But non-economic losses are equally critical, and they're often overlooked. We found that many migrant workers experience a loss of autonomy, especially under, and as Jocelyn mentioned, under systems where their ability to leave a job, return home, access healthcare is controlled by an employer, despite the fact that there have been announced reforms. Application in real life does not necessarily reflect these on paper reforms. There is also the loss of legal identity, also as mentioned, especially for those without proper documentation, and the erosion of safety, dignity, and community support. And for instance, giving you an example of an Egyptian worker we interviewed who told us that he couldn't return home even though his health was deteriorating. He didn't have the money or the permission to leave. In his words, basically, he had lost not just income, but a sense of control over his life. But these kinds, as I said, these kinds of losses rarely show up in adaptation plans or compensation frameworks, but they're central to understanding vulnerability and designing just or fair responses. And I think we need to expand what we consider loss beyond property or income to include erosion of rights, health, autonomy. For many of those who we interviewed, these were acutely felt losses. Yeah, and I think addressing them means embedding mobility justice and labor protections into adaptation frameworks. It also means recognizing migrants not just as economic actors or beneficiaries, but as right holders, and ensuring that climate financing and national plans reflect that.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both so much for all that you have shared with us. We're going to move into the interactive session. So we're going to put people into breakout groups. We're going to have a short interactive session in which we want to hear from you guys, what you've been experiencing, etc. So you'll have a facilitator. So yeah, I don't know if the PCCB can assign us 2 rooms. Yes, so they're setting us. They're setting the. Yes, perfect. Thank you, Christina.
Hi, everybody. I'll be your moderator for this breakout room. My name's Carlos. I'm
Right.
a stringer.
Guys, just to make sure, I'm not very sure if we are already in the room. Christina, can you just confirm?
Yes, they are now open, so theoretically, participants are moving automatically to the groups.
Oh, well, do we just want to give it a couple minutes, and then we can talk a little bit more about the topics, like 2 minutes, maybe? Or are you saying that we're already in the breakout room? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm afraid someone doesn't have. Can you check, Christina? Because you have the right.
Yes, so we have people in meeting rooms, but I don't know why these participants here in this room where we are right now have not been moved. I think you have the right, Natalia.
I cannot.
Okay, wait. Okay, now I can do it now. Okay. 1 second, please. Carlos, I have made you a presenter. Can you move into a group? Just
you have to go to group 1, Carlos, please, if you can.
Okay. Yes,
Can you see it?
How do I do that? I'm sorry, I'm not super familiar with Teams infrastructure.
There is a breakout group, like part up. If you cannot see, like right next to share.
Right next to share, you mean?
Yes.
It's not coming up right next to share. I just have my mic and then the leave button. Sorry.
For some reason.
Sorry, I cannot manage to add anyone in any other room. I don't know why.
But Carlos is the moderator, right? So.
Okay.
Let me see.
Sorry, I thought a notification to join the room had come up, but it was something else.
Okay, I just moved people from group 1 to here. So this can be our group 1 as a solution.
Okay, yes, perfect. Thank you, Chris.
You're welcome.
That sounds good. Thank you. So I'm Carlos. I'll be one of your moderators for these two topics. Do we just want to start with what barriers do people on the move face when trying to participate in climate adaptation planning in your context? If anyone wants to start with that or has any specific thoughts. Anybody? We could also, if anyone wants to speak about the second topic as well, beyond economic losses, what non-material losses do women experience most during climate displacement, and how should these be addressed is an interesting topic as well. I feel like if anyone wants to touch either of these two topics, I'm more than willing to do them out of order.
No idea.
Oh,
No idea.
oh. Sorry, Raj, did you have something to say?
No, I was just going to say how to go into the main meeting. Because
Oh,
I've been playing with some signs there, but I don't think it's helping much.
Yes, so we moved you back to this room because Carlos couldn't be assignated to the room that you were at. So
Yeah,
we
no,
are starting here.
with that. So am I in the main room now or no? Yes?
Yes, you're in the correct one. Carlos, if you want to
Sure.
start now. Mhm.
yeah. So do we want to begin with the first topic of discussion, which is what barriers do people on the move face when trying to participate in climate adaptation planning in your context? And something that, oh,
Yeah, so can I jump in on this because I have to leave?
absolutely, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Raj Badawi. Camera is not working. Um, I'm from the Global Research Forum on Diaspora and Transnationalism. There was some talk about token participation of the community in national adaptation plans. That there's one person, sometimes two people. The question which I put in the chat was, when we say clearly, you can't have multiple people sitting in government forum. So what we perhaps thought that the representative of the community or representatives of the community who are taking part in the formulation of NAPs, perhaps they need to be trained as to what it means to be soliciting the views and concerns and challenges that the community face. So they then become basically the bearers of what they discuss with them first before they go to these government meetings, because they should really be the authentic representatives, not just one guy say, okay, well, you choose him or you choose her. It's like, are they trained? That's my question. Are they trained as to what their role and responsibilities are or expectations are in the formulation or in the contribution of formulating NAPs, and what are NAPs and how important they are? Maybe it is done. Maybe I'm just, putting the cart before the horse. But I was just wondering, since I'm not at the grassroots level, I am at the, we do research and so on. So could somebody enlighten me that they are actually trained, and indeed, for that matter, even the NAP formulators are trained. To what extent are government people trained, or even at the district level or at the regional, are they trained as to what these NAPs means and how critical it is that it speaks to? We can be saying inclusive participation. Maybe these words are too loaded. Are they trained? Are they, so popular participation means going low to the lowest, the municipal level or even further level, depending on what kind of system, popular participation system they have in place. And that they are trained as to, look, this is what we're going to do, why we're going to do that, why it is important, why everybody must say their say so that. So is all that level done or not? Thank you.
Sorry, I was just going to say that was a great contribution. I think it's important that the people representing a group are educated in this way that they're able to represent the ideas of the group or community that they're representing, kind of acting as a pass-through for those ideas instead of just being there, right? So I get, oh, go ahead.
So are we doing it, and who's supposed to be doing it? In other words, who? Are these the grassroots organizations should be doing it? Those who are community-related, community-based organizations, should they also be doing that? To sensitize them, to give them information, to train them, to empower them, to listen to their concerns so they listen to the larger group's concerns. So it's not the number of people who sit in these meetings. but the true, authentic representative or representatives who come. So in that way, you're actually giving them the ownership. Instead of speaking for them, they speak for themselves.
Jocelyn, do you want to speak? It looks like you have something to say. Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, I mean, I would be super interested to learn more about what PCCB is doing, especially for government officials, to part of Raj's question. But we are doing a really exciting and I hopefully informative project in Uganda right now with refugee communities that can speak to some of this. And so part of this is that Uganda is developing its first national adaptation plan right now and is the largest refugee hosting country in Africa. And so if Uganda can support inclusion of refugee communities, then hopefully those lessons can be applied in other contexts as well, not necessarily about what those communities need to adapt to climate change, but about the design of the process itself. And so what we've done so far is a couple of trial consultations in 2 of the 13 settlements in Uganda that Refugees International led in partnership with one of our refugee fellows, who is a refugee living in Uganda herself. And now we're trying to build that out to do first a training in Kampala, where we'll bring refugee leaders from all 13 settlements, hopefully about 5 or 6 people from each place, to Kampala to hear from government officials, UNHCR and UNDP and other officials that are active in the NAP process, to learn about the national adaptation planning process itself, because I don't think that you can be consulted and participate meaningfully if you don't come with sort of equal information and knowledge of what the process is and what it means. And to hear from those groups about the climate adaptation work that they're already doing, about the climate stressors their communities are facing, and for the government that is designing the NAP to hear that from them directly as well, with the goal that then those people that come to Kampala will be able to go back to their communities and share that information with the other refugee-led organizations in each of the 13 settlements. And then eventually the hope is that the government itself will have officials who travel to each of the 13 settlements and do larger scale consultations with each of the communities in the settlements so that as many people can participate as possible, but that there will have been this engagement process whereby people have information about the NAP process, what it is, what it will mean once it's implemented for their communities, and that there's government buy-in to do this consultation themselves and to know sort of throughout the process exactly what restrictions and stressors these communities are facing. And that also within the various bodies, like there's a NAP committee, that there's refugee representation on those boards as well, but that shouldn't be the only sort of form of representation. That, to your point, Raj, that there's this kind of sensitization of the whole process, and that individuals are informed of what it means, and that at various levels sort of there's engagement in the process at the community level up through the sort of government leadership of these initiatives. And so the hope is kind of once we do that, we'll have a lot of lessons, I'm sure. Maybe we'll have a roadmap for how to do this effectively, if all goes well, that we can share with other governments, other refugee leaders, other civil society support organizations to try to replicate and improve on it in other contexts. But that's to be seen.
Thank you so much. Since we're closing in a few minutes, I wanted to move to the second topic just to discuss it a little bit briefly, if we can, which is beyond economic losses. What non-material losses do women experience most during climate displacement, and how should these be addressed? And I think an important corollary to this is how these losses can be remediated, whether that's through restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, or guarantees of non-repetition, right? Like how, yeah. Sorry, Raj, did you have something to add?
Sorry, are you asking?
Sorry, I just saw your mic was on and thought that you wanted to say something. My apologies.
No, maybe I forgot to turn it off. But if nobody's saying anything, I might. But I'll wait.
I appreciate you.
Sorry,
So,
what was it on loss and damages?
What non-material losses do women experience most during climate displacement, and how can these be addressed?
Well, I mean, we know the non-material. It's always the cultural association, your love for your place where you live, emotional attachment. It's not only just women. The communities feel that you don't want to move somewhere because it's unknown, it's uncertain. There is too much uncertainty, and people have lived in certain places for generations. There's those memories. There is those attachment and so on. However, people are also realistic. In other words, they won't be forced to move if they don't want to move, or if they don't have the capacity to move or the resources to move. But if their life is in danger, their livelihood is in danger, and they are assured a better prospects elsewhere, yes, they would consider. I think I'm sorry. Sometimes we think people, I haven't done any work, but perhaps we should, to check their attitude towards mobility, because it's now more accepted than it was many years ago, decades ago. Mobility was something you didn't do it. Now it's a fluid world. People are moving from one, and in fact, they want people to move. But I mean, whether these people who are in the coastal area, people who are perhaps remote from other regions of their country, and so that's another matter. Maybe we shouldn't assume people are reluctant to move because they have stronger association or cultural association with their place of origin. It is, it's important. But what is important to people is, am I going to be able to survive, both materially as well as physically? Can I survive? Are my kids going to survive? Do they have any prospects? I don't know. I mean, in other words, perhaps we need to refresh our knowledge as to how people are adapting to the changes in the world, changes in their community, changes around. Because often you'll find in most communities, one or the two people have moved, not only out of the village or out of the city to another city, but also abroad. And that there is so much information going. So and so went. I don't know if we're using our own knowledge, or I haven't done any work in terms of people's attitudes towards mobility. But definitely be resistance, because there are too many unknowns. You don't just jump. Moving is not only costly. Moving has a lot of other issues
We carry
associated.
out one activity, and we find out that
Sorry,
it is very important.
Very much.
I think we're all moving back to everyone's moving back to the main room. I'm sorry to cut you short, Raj, but those were some very insightful.
Thank you.
It's some very insightful knowledge about this discussion. Thank you so much.
Yes. We're back in the main room. We also lost one of our persons. All right. Right. Okay, now, welcome back, and thank you so much for such rich discussion. I wish we had more time, but please keep in touch. Atia share her email. I'm gonna share our email as well. We would love to keep talking with you guys. And I want to pass on to, I believe University of Graz had some words to close off. So.
Thank you so much, Isati. Thank you so much. Actually, I'm talking on behalf of Clean Blood Center. It's our pleasure to be here with all of you today, and thank you so much again to PCCP for giving us this opportunity to discuss on this timely topic and very important topic. Yeah, and it was a really great webinar, I think, and I hope that all the participants enjoyed so far. Thank you so much again.
Yes. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, PCCB, for making this space. And we'll continue this conversation. Have a lovely day, evening, wherever your time zone might be. Gracias.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.